Anansi and the Lion. Once upon a time, Anansi planned a scheme. He went to town and bought ever so many firkins of fat, and ever so many sacks, and ever so many balls of string, and a very big frying pan. Then he went to the bay and blew a shell, and called the head fish in the sea green eel to him. Then he said to the fish, "The king sends me to tell you that you must bring all the fish on shore, for he wants to give them new life." So Green Eel said he would, and went to call them. Meanwhile, Anansi lighted a fire, and took out some of the fat, and he got his frying pan ready, and as fast as the fish came out of the water, he caught them and put them into the frying pan. And so he did with all of them until he got to the head fish, who was so slippery that he couldn't hold him, and he got back again into the water. When Anansi had fried all the fish, he put them into the sacks, and took the sacks on his back, and set off to the mountains. He had not gone very far when he met Lion, and Lion said to him, "Well, brother Anansi, where have you been? I have not seen you a long time." Anansi said, "I have been traveling about." "Oh, but what have you got there?" said the Lion. "Oh, I have got my mother's bones. She has been dead these 11 years, and they say I must not keep her here, so I am taking her up into the middle of the mountains to bury her." Then they parted. After he had gone a little way, the Lion said, "I know that Anansi is a great rogue. I dare say he has got something there that he doesn't want me to see, and I will just follow him." But he took care not to let Anansi see him. Now, when Anansi got into the wood, he set his sacks down, and took one fish out and began to eat. Then a fly came, and Anansi said, "I cannot eat any more, for there is someone near." So he tied the sack and went on farther into the mountains, where he set his sacks down and took out 2 fish which he ate, and no fly came. He said, "There is no one near." So he took out 1 more fish. But when he had eaten about half a dozen, the Lion came up and said, "Well, brother Anansi, a pretty tale you have told me." "Oh, brother Lion, I am so glad you have come. Never mind what tale I have told you, but come and sit down. It was only my fun." So Lion sat down and began to eat. But before Anansi had eaten 2 fish, Lion had emptied one of the sacks. Then said Anansi to himself, "Greedy fellow, eating up all my fish. What do you say, sir?" "I only said you do not eat half fast enough," for he was afraid the Lion would eat him up. Then they went on eating, but Anansi wanted to revenge himself, and he said to the Lion, "Which of us do you think is the stronger?" The Lion said, "Well, I am, of course." Then Anansi said, "We will tie one another to the tree, and we shall see which is the stronger." Now they agreed that the Lion should tie Anansi first, and he tied him with some very fine string, and did not tie him tight. Anansi twisted himself about 2 or 3 times, and the string broke. Then it was Anansi's turn to tie the Lion, and he took some very strong cord. The Lion said, "You must not tie me tight, for I did not tie you tight." And Anansi said, "Oh, no, to be sure I will not." But he tied him as tight as ever he could, and then told him to try and get loose. The Lion tried and tried in vain. He could not get loose. Then Anansi thought, "Now is my chance." So he got a big stick and beat him, and then went away and left him, for he was afraid to lose him lest he should kill him. Now there was a woman called Miss Nancy, who was going out one morning to get some callaloo in the wood, and as she was going she heard someone say, "Good morning, Miss Nancy." She could not tell who spoke to her, but she looked where the voice came from, and saw the Lion tied to the tree. "Good morning, Mr. Lion. What are you doing there?" He said, "It is all that fellow Anansi who has tied me to the tree. But will you loose me?" But she said, "No, for I am afraid. If I do, you will kill me." But he gave her his word he would not. Still, she could not trust him, but he begged her again and again, and she said, "Well, if I do try to eat you, I hope all the trees will cry out shame upon me." So at last she consented. But she had no sooner loosed him than he came up to eat her, for he had been so many days without food that he was quite ravenous. But the trees immediately cried out, "Shame!" and so he could not eat her. Then she went away as fast as she could, and the lion found his way home. When Lion got home, he told his wife and children all that had happened to him, and how Miss Nancy had saved his life. So they said they would have a great dinner, and ask Miss Nancy. Now, when Anansi heard of it, he wanted to go to the dinner, so he went to Miss Nancy and said she must take him with her as her child, but she said no. Then he said, "I can turn myself into quite a little child, and then you can take me." And at last she said, "Yes." And he told her, when she was asked what pap her baby ate, she must be sure to tell them it did not eat pap, but the same food as everyone else. And so they went and had a very good dinner and set off home again. But somehow one of the lion's sons fancied that all was not right, and he told his father he was sure of it, that it was Anansi, and the lion set out after him. Now, as they were going along, before the lion got up to them, Anansi begged Miss Nancy to put him down, that he might run, which he did, and he got away and ran along the wood, and the lion ran after him. When he found the lion was overtaking him, he turned himself into an old man with a bundle of wood on his head. And when the lion got up to him, he said, "Good morning, Mr. Lion." And the lion said, "Good morning, old gentleman." Then the old man said, "What are you after now?" And the lion asked if he had seen Anansi pass that way. But the old man said, "No, that fellow Anansi is always meddling with someone. What mischief has he been up to now?" Then the lion told him, but the old man said it was no use to follow him any more, for he would never catch him. And so the lion wished him good day, and turned.
The Rat Princess. Once upon a time, there was a rat princess who lived with her father, the Rat King, and her mother, the Rat Queen, in a rice field in far-away Japan. The rat princess was so pretty that her father and mother were quite foolishly proud of her and thought no one good enough to play with her. When she grew up, they would not let any of the rat princes come to visit her, and they decided at last that no one should marry her till they had found the most powerful person in the whole world. No one else was good enough. And the father rat started out to find the most powerful person in the whole world. The wisest and oldest rat in the rice field said that the sun must be the most powerful person because he made the rice grow and ripen. So the Rat King went to find the sun. He climbed up the highest mountain, ran up the path of a rainbow, and traveled across the sky till he came to the sun's house. "What do you want, little brother?" the sun said when he saw him. "I come," said the Rat King very importantly, "to offer you the hand of my daughter, the princess, because you are the most powerful person in the world. No one else is good enough." "Ha, ha!" laughed the jolly round sun and winked with his eye. "You are very kind, little brother, but if that is the case, the princess is not for me. The cloud is more powerful than I am. When he passes over me, I cannot shine." "Oh, indeed," said the Rat King. "Then you are not my man at all." And he left the sun without more words. The sun laughed and winked to himself, and the Rat King traveled across the sky till he came to the cloud's house. "What do you want, little brother?" sighed the cloud when he saw him. "I come to offer you the hand of my daughter, the princess," said the Rat King, "because you are the most powerful person in the world. The sun said so, and no one else is good enough." The cloud sighed again. "I am not the most powerful person," he said. "The wind is stronger than I. When he blows, I have to go wherever he sends me." "Then you are not the person for my daughter," said the Rat King proudly, and he started at once to find the wind. He traveled and traveled across the sky till he came at last to the wind's house at the very edge of the world. When the wind saw him coming, he laughed a big gusty laugh, ho, 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 and asked him what he wanted. And when the Rat King told him that he had come to offer him the Rat Princess's hand because he was the most powerful person in the world, the wind shouted a great gusty shout and said, "No, no, I am not the strongest. The wall that man has made is stronger than I. I cannot make him move with all my blowing. Go to the wall, little brother." And the Rat King climbed down the sky path again and traveled across the earth till he came to the wall. It was quite near his own rice field. "What do you want, little brother?" grumbled the wall when he saw him. "I come to offer you the hand of the princess, my daughter, because you are the most powerful person in the world, and no one else is good enough." "Ugh, ugh," grumbled the wall. "I am not the strongest. The big gray rat who lives in the cellar is stronger than I. When he gnaws and gnaws at me, I crumble and crumble, and at last I fall. Go to the rat, little brother." And so, after going all over the world to find the strongest person, the Rat King had to marry his daughter to a rat after all. But the princess was very glad of it, for she wanted to marry the gray rat all the time.
The Badger's Money. It is a common saying among men that to forget favors received is the part of a bird or a beast. An ungrateful man will be ill spoken of by all the world, and yet even birds and beasts will show gratitude, so that a man who does not requite a favor is worse even than dumb brutes. Is this not a disgrace? Once upon a time, in a hut at a place called Namakata in Hitachi, there lived an old priest, famous neither for learning nor wisdom, but bent only on passing his days in prayer and meditation. He had not even a child to wait upon him, but prepared his food with his own hands. Night and morning he recited the prayer, Namu Amidi Butsu, intent upon that alone. Although the fame of his virtue did not reach far, yet his neighbors respected and revered him, and often brought him food and raiment, and when his roof or his walls fell out of repair, they would mend them for him, so for the things of this world he took no thought. One very cold night, when he little thought anyone was outside, he heard a voice calling, "Your Reverence, Your Reverence." So he rose and went out to see who it was, and there he beheld an old badger standing. Any ordinary man would have been greatly alarmed at the apparition, but the priest, being such as he has been described above, showed no signs of fear, but asked the creature its business. Upon this, the badger respectfully bent its knees and said, "Hitherto, sir, my lair has been in the mountains, and of snow or frost I have taken no need. But now I am growing old, and this severe cold is more than I can bear. I pray you to let me enter and warm myself at the fire of your cottage, that I may live throughout this bitter night." When the priest heard what a helpless state the beast was reduced to, he was filled with pity and said, "That's a very slight matter. Make haste, and come in, and warm yourself." The badger, delighted with so good a reception, went into the hut, and squatting down by the fire began to warm itself, and the priest, with renewed fervor, recited his prayers and struck his bell before the image of Buddha, looking straight before him. After 2 hours, the badger took its leave with profuse expressions of thanks and went out, and from that time forth it came every night to the hut. As the badger would collect and bring with it dried branches and dead leaves from the hills for firewood, the priest at last became very friendly with it, and got used to its company, so that, if ever, as the night wore on, the badger did not arrive, he used to miss it, and wonder why it did not come. When the winter was over, and the springtime came at the end of the 2nd month, the badger gave up its visits, and was no more seen, but, on the return of the winter, the beast resumed its old habit of coming to the hut. When this practice had gone on for 10 years, one day the badger said to the priest, "Through your reverence's kindnesses for all these years, I have been able to pass the winter nights in comfort. Your favors are such that, during all my life, and even after my death, I must remember them. What can I do to requite them? If there is anything that you wish for, pray, tell me." The priest, smiling at this speech, answered, "Being such as I am, I have no desire and no wishes. Glad as I am to hear your kind intentions, there is nothing that I can ask you to do for me. You need feel no anxiety on my account. As long as I live, when the winter comes, you shall be welcome here." The badger, on hearing this, could not conceal its admiration of the depth of the old man's benevolence, but having so much to be grateful for, it felt hurt at not being able to requite it. As this subject was often renewed between them, the priest, at last touched by the goodness of the badger's heart, said, "Since I have shaven my head, renounced the world, and forsaken the pleasures of this life, I have no desire to gratify. Yet I own I should like to possess 3 rayos in gold. Food and raiment I receive by the favor of the villagers, so I take no heed for those things. Were I to die tomorrow and attain my wish of being born again into the next world, the same kind folk have promised to meet and bury my body. Thus, although I have no other reason to wish for money, still, if I had 3 rayos, I would offer them up at some holy shrine, that masses and prayers might be said for me, whereby I might enter into salvation. Yet I would not get this money by violent or unlawful means. I only think of what might be if I had it. So you see, since you have expressed such kind feelings towards me, I have told you what is on my mind." When the priest had done speaking, the badger leant its head on one side with a puzzled and anxious look, so much so that the old man was sorry he had expressed a wish which seemed to give the beast trouble, and tried to retract what he had said. Posthumous honors, after all, are the wish of ordinary men. I, who am a priest, ought not to entertain such thoughts, or to want money, so pray, pay no attention to what I have said." And the badger, feigning assent to what the priest had impressed upon it, returned to the hills as usual. From that time forth, the badger came no more to the hut. The priest thought this very strange, but imagined either that the badger stayed away because it did not like to come without the money, or that it had been killed in an attempt to steal it, and he blamed himself for having added to his sins for no purpose, repenting when it was too late. Persuaded, however, that the badger must have been killed, he passed his time in putting up prayers upon prayers for it. After 3 years had gone by, one night the old man heard a voice near his door calling out, "Your Reverence! Your Reverence!" As the voice was like that of the badger, he jumped up as soon as he heard it, and ran to open the door, and there, sure enough, was the badger. The priest, in great delight, cried out, "And so you are safe and sound after all? Why have you been so long without coming here? I have been expecting you anxiously this long while." So the badger came into the hut and said, "If the money which you required had been for unlawful purposes, I could easily have procured as much as ever you might have wanted. But when I heard that it was to be offered to a temple for masses for your soul, I thought that, if I were to steal the hidden treasures of some other man, you could not apply to a sacred purpose money which had been obtained at the expense of his sorrow. So I went to the island of Sado, and gathering the sand and earth which had been cast away as worthless by the miners, fused it afresh in the fire, and at this work I spent months and days." As the badger finished speaking, the priest looked at the money which it had produced, and sure enough he saw that it was bright and new and clean, so he took the money and received it respectfully, raising it to his head. "And so you have had all this toil and labor on account of a foolish speech of mine? I have obtained my heart's desire, and am truly thankful." As he was thanking the badger with great politeness and ceremony, the beast said, "In doing this, I have but fulfilled my own wish. Still, I hope that you will tell this thing to no man." "Indeed," replied the priest, "I cannot choose but tell this story, for if I keep this money in my poor hut, it will be stolen by thieves. I must either give it to someone to keep for me, or else at once offer it up at the temple. And when I do this, when people see a poor old priest with a sum of money quite unsuited to his station, they will think it very suspicious, and I shall have to tell the tale as it occurred. But I shall say that the badger that gave me the money has ceased coming to my hut. You need not fear being waylaid, but can come as of old and shelter yourself from the cold. To this the badger nodded assent, and as long as the old priest lived, it came and spent the winter nights with him. From this story it is plain that even beasts have a sense of gratitude. In this quality dogs excel all other beasts. Is not the story of the dog of Totoribe Yorodzu written in the annals of Japan? I have heard that many anecdotes of this nature have been collected and printed in a book, which I have not yet seen, but as the facts which I have recorded relate to a badger, they appear.
The burning of the rice field. Once there was a good old man who lived up on a mountain far away in Japan. All round his little house the mountain was flat, and the ground was rich, and there were the rice fields of all the people who lived in the village at the mountain's foot. Mornings and evenings the old man and his little grandson who lived with him used to look far down on the people at work in the village, and watch the blue sea which lay all round the land so close that there was no room for fields below, only for houses. The little boy loved the rice fields dearly, for he knew that all the good food for all the people came from them, and he often helped his grandfather to watch over them. One day the grandfather was standing alone before his house, looking far down at the people and out at the sea, when suddenly he saw something very strange off where the sea and sky meet. Something like a great cloud was rising there, as if the sea were lifting itself high into the sky. The old man put his hands to his eyes and looked again, hard as his old sight could. Then he turned and ran to the house. "Yon, Yon," he cried, "bring a brand from the hearth." The little grandson could not imagine what his grandfather wanted with fire, but he always obeyed, so he ran quickly and brought the brand. The old man already had one and was running for the rice fields. Yon ran after. But what was his horror to see his grandfather thrust his burning brand into the ripe, dry rice where it stood. "Oh, grandfather, grandfather!" screamed the little boy. "What are you doing?" "Quick, set fire, thrust your brand in," said the grandfather. Yon thought his dear grandfather had lost his mind, and he began to sob. But a little Japanese boy always obeys, so though he sobbed, he thrust his torch in, and the sharp flame ran up the dry stalks, red and yellow. In an instant the field was ablaze, and thick black smoke began to pour up on the mountainside. It rose like a cloud, black and fierce, and in no time the people below saw that their precious rice fields were on fire. Ah, how they ran! Men, women, and children climbed the mountain, running as fast as they could to save the rice. Not one soul stayed behind. And when they came to the mountain top and saw the beautiful rice crop all in flames beyond help, they cried bitterly, "Who has done this thing? How did it happen?" "I set fire," said the old man very solemnly, and the little grandson sobbed, "Grandfather set fire." But when they came fiercely round the old man with, "Why? Why?" he only turned and pointed to the sea. "Look," he said. They all turned and looked, and there, where the blue sea had lain so calm, a mighty wall of water, reaching from earth to sky, was rolling in. No one could scream, so terrible was the sight. The wall of water rolled in on the land, passed quite over the place where the village had been, and broke with an awful sound on the mountainside. One wave more, and still one more came, and then all was water, as far as they could look below. The village where they had been was under the sea. But the people were all safe, and when they saw what the old man had done, they honored him above all men for the quick wit which had saved them all from the tidal wave.
The Dragon and the Prince. There was an emperor who had 3 sons. One day the eldest son went out hunting, and when he got outside the town, up sprang a hare out of a bush, and he after it, and hither and thither, till the hare fled into a watermill, and the prince after it. But it was not a hare, but a dragon, and it waited for the prince and devoured him. When several days had elapsed and the prince did not return home, people began to wonder why it was that he was not to be found. Then the middle son went hunting. And as he issued from the town, a hare sprang out of a bush, and the prince after it, and hither and thither, till the hare fled into the watermill, and the prince after it. But it was not a hare, but a dragon, which waited for and devoured him. When some days had elapsed, and the princes did not return, either of them, the whole court was in sorrow. Then the third son went hunting, to see whether he could not find his brothers. When he issued from the town, again sprang up a hare out of a bush, and the prince after it, and hither and thither, till the hare fled into the watermill. But the prince did not choose to follow it, but went to find other game, saying to himself, "When I return, I shall find you." After thus, he went for a long time up and down the hill, but found nothing, and then returned to the watermill. But when he got there was only an old woman in the mill. The prince invoked God in addressing her. "God help you, old woman." The old woman replied, "God help you, my son." Then the prince asked her, "Where, old woman, is my hare?" She replied, "My son, that was not a hare, but a dragon. It kills and throttles many people." Hearing this, the prince was somewhat disturbed and said to the old woman, "What shall we do now? Doubtless my brothers also have perished here." The old woman answered, "They have indeed, but there's no help for it. Go home, my son, lest you follow them." Then he said to her, "Dear old woman, do you know what? I know that you will be glad to liberate yourself from that pest." The old woman interrupted him, "How should I not? It captured me too in this way, but now I have no means of escape." Then he proceeded, "Listen well to what I'm going to say to you. Ask it whither it goes and where its strength is. Then kiss all that place where it tells you its strength is, as if from love, till you ascertain it, and afterward tell me when I come." Then the prince went off to the palace, and the old woman remained in the watermill. When the dragon came in, the old woman began to question it. "Where in God's name have you been? Whither do you go so far? You will never tell me whither you go." The dragon replied, "Well, my dear woman, I do go far." Then the old woman began to coax it. "And why do you go so far? Tell me where your strength is. If I knew where your strength is, I don't know what I should do for love. I would kiss all that place." Thereupon the dragon smiled and said to her, "Yonder is my strength, in that fireplace." Then the old woman began to fondle and kiss the fireplace, and the dragon, on seeing it, burst into a laugh and said to her, "Silly old woman, my strength isn't there. My strength is in that tree fungus in front of the house." Then the old woman began again to fondle and kiss the tree, and the dragon again laughed and said to her, "Away, old woman, my strength isn't there." Then the old woman inquired, "Where is it?" The dragon began to give an account in detail. "My strength is a long way off, and you cannot go thither. Far in another empire under the emperor's city is a lake. In that lake is a dragon, and in that dragon a boar, and in the boar a pigeon, and in that is my strength." The next morning, when the dragon went away from the mill, the prince came to the old woman, and the old woman told him all that she had heard from the dragon. Then he left his home and disguised himself. He put shepherd's boots to his feet, took a shepherd's staff in his hand, and went into the world. As he went on thus from village to village, and from town to town, at last he came into another empire and into the imperial city, in a lake under which the dragon was. On going into the town, he began to inquire who wanted a shepherd. The citizens told him that the emperor did. Then he went straight to the emperor. After he announced himself, the emperor admitted him into his presence and asked him, "Do you wish to keep sheep?" He replied, "I do, illustrious crown." Then the emperor engaged him and began to inform and instruct him. "There is here a lake, and alongside of the lake very beautiful pasture. And when you call the sheep out, they go thither at once, and spread themselves round the lake. But whatever shepherd goes off there, that shepherd returns back no more. Therefore, my son, I tell you, don't let the sheep have their way, and go where they will, but keep them where you will." The prince thanked the emperor, got himself ready, and called out the sheep, taking with him moreover 2 hounds that could catch a boar in the open country, and a falcon that could capture any bird, and carrying also a pair of bagpipes. When he called out the sheep, he let them go at once to the lake. And when the sheep arrived at the lake, they immediately spread round it, and the prince placed the falcon on a stump, and the hounds and bagpipes under the stump, then tucked up his hose and sleeves, waded into the lake, and began to shout, "Dragon, dragon, come out to single combat with me today, that we may measure ourselves together, unless you're a woman." The dragon called out in reply, "I will do so now, prince, now." Ere long, behold the dragon. It is large, it is terrible, it is disgusting. When the dragon came out, it seized him by the waist, and they wrestled a summer day till afternoon. But when the heat of the afternoon came on, the dragon said, "Let me go, prince, that I may moisten my parched head in the lake and toss you to the sky." But the prince replied, "Come, dragon, don't talk nonsense. If I had the emperor's daughter to kiss me on the forehead, I would toss you higher." Thereupon the dragon suddenly let him go and went off into the lake. On the approach of evening he washed and got himself up nicely, placed the falcon on his arm, the hounds behind him, and the bagpipes under his arm, then drove the sheep and went into the town playing on the bagpipes. When he arrived at the town, the whole town assembled as to see a wondrous sight, because he had come, whereas previously no shepherd had been able to come from the lake. The next day the prince got ready again, and went with his sheep straight to the lake. But the emperor sent 2 grooms after him to go stealthily and see what he did, and they placed themselves on a high hill, whence they could have a good view. When the shepherd arrived, he put the hounds and bagpipes under the stump, and the falcon upon it, then tucked up his hose and sleeves, waded into the lake, and shouted, "Dragon, dragon, come out to single combat with me, that we may measure ourselves once more together, unless you are a woman." The dragon replied, "I will do so, prince, now." Ere long, behold the dragon. It was large, it was terrible, it was disgusting. And it seized him by the waist and wrestled him a summer's day till afternoon. But when the afternoon heat came on, the dragon said, "Let me go, prince, that I may moisten my parched head in the lake, and may toss you to the sky." The prince replied, "Come, dragon, don't talk nonsense. If I had the emperor's daughter to kiss me on the forehead, I would toss you still higher." Thereupon the dragon suddenly left hold of him and went off into the lake. When night approached, the prince drove the sheep as before, and went home playing the bagpipes. When he arrived at the town, the whole town was astir, and began to wonder, because the shepherd came home every evening, which no one had been able to do before. Those 2 grooms had already arrived at the palace before the prince, and related to the emperor in order everything that they had heard and seen. Now when the emperor saw that the shepherd returned home, he immediately summoned his daughter into his presence and told her all, what it was and how it was. "But," said he, "tomorrow you must go with the shepherd to the lake and kiss him on the forehead." When she heard this, she burst into tears and began to entreat her father. "You have no one but me. Am I your only daughter? And you don't care about me if I perish?" Then the emperor began to persuade and encourage her. "Don't fear, my daughter. You see, we have had so many changes of shepherds, and of all that went out to the lake, not one has returned, but he Had he been contending with the dragon for 2 whole days, and it has done him no hurt? I assure you, in God's name, that he is able to overcome the dragon. Only go tomorrow with him to see whether he will free us from this mischief which has destroyed so many people." When on the morrow the day dawned and the sun came forth, up rose the shepherd, up rose the maiden too, to begin prepare for going to the lake. The shepherd was cheerful, more cheerful than ever, but the emperor's daughter was sad and shed tears. The shepherd comforted her. "Lady sister, I pray you, do not weep, but do what I tell you. When it is time, run up and kiss me, and fear not." As he went and drove the sheep, the shepherd was thoroughly cheery, and played a merry tune on his bagpipes. But the damsel did nothing but weep as she went beside him, and he several times left off playing and turned toward her. "Weep not, golden one, fear not." When they arrived at the lake, the sheep immediately spread round it, and the prince placed the falcon on the stump, and the hounds and bagpipes under it, then tucked up his hose and sleeves, waded into the water, and shouted, "Dragon, dragon, come out to single combat with me. Let us measure ourselves once more, unless you're a woman." The dragon replied, "I will, prince. Now, now." Ere long there was the dragon. It was huge. It was terrible. It was disgusting. When it came out, they seized each other by the middle and wrestled a summer's day till afternoon. But when the afternoon heat came on, the dragon said, "Let me go, prince, that I may moisten my parched head in the lake and toss you to the skies." The prince replied, "Come, dragon, don't talk nonsense. If I had the emperor's daughter to kiss me on the forehead, I would toss you much higher." When he said this, the emperor's daughter ran up and kissed him on the face, on the eye, and on the forehead. Then he swung the dragon and tossed it high into the air, and when it fell to the ground, it burst into pieces. But as it burst into pieces, out of it sprang a wild boar, and it started to run away. But the prince shouted to his shepherd, "Dogs, hold it! Don't let it go!" And the dogs sprang up and after it, caught it, and soon tore it to pieces. But out of the boar flew a pigeon, and the prince loosed the falcon, and the falcon caught the pigeon and brought it into the prince's hands. The prince said to it, "Tell me now, where are my brothers?" The pigeon replied, "I will. Only do me no harm. Immediately behind your father's town is a watermill, and in the watermill are 3 wands that have sprouted up. Cut these 3 wands from up below, and strike with them upon their root. An iron door will immediately open into a large vault. In that vault are many people, old and young, rich and poor, small and great, wives and maidens, so that you could settle a populous empire. There too are your brothers." When the pigeon had told him all this, the prince immediately wrung its neck. The emperor had gone out in person, and posted himself on the hill from which the grooms had viewed the shepherd, and he too was a spectator of all that had taken place. After the shepherd had thus obtained the dragon's head, twilight began to approach. He washed himself nicely, took the falcon on his shoulder, the hounds behind him, and the bagpipes under his arm, played as he went, drove the sheep, and proceeded to the emperor's palace, with the damsel at his side still in terror. When they came to the town, all the town assembled as to see a wonder. The emperor, who had seen all his heroism from the hill, called him into his presence, and gave him his daughter, went immediately to church, had them married, and held a wedding festival for a week. After this the prince told him who and whence he was, and the emperor and the whole town rejoiced still more. Then, as the prince was urgent to go to his own house, the emperor gave him a large escort and equipped him for the journey. When they were in the neighborhood of the watermill, the prince halted his attendants, went inside, cut up the 3 wands, and struck the root with them, and the iron door opened at once. In the vault was a vast multitude of people. The prince ordered them to come out one by one and go whither each would, and stood himself at the door. They came out thus one after another, and lo, there were his brothers also, whom he embraced and kissed. When the whole multitude had come out, they thanked him for releasing and delivering them, and went each to his own home. But he went to his father's house with his brothers and bride, and there lived and reigned to